Hello, my name is Liz Blake, and some of you will know me from my fairly extensive involvement in the federal election and Victorian election. And now I'm doing a few things to help with the New South Wales election, which is coming up. Now, there is a group of people that I call the quiet heroes of elections. And these are the scrutineers. So this training is for scrutineers, which means potential scrutineers. You may not have decided yet to become a scrutineer for your party, for your candidate, but it's really, really highly encouraged. The purpose I'm doing this is to train you and to fill a gap, to equip and inspire you to do this job, to this really important job, and to do it well, and to be able to do it well, and to develop a culture among us of civic participation, that this is really, really important. It's as important as going to work. Well, anyway, we live in Australia, and this is where we have responsibilities to our nation and opportunity too. So this training is going to be in 3 parts, and so you can stop it and have a cuppa at any time. It's not terribly long, but it's going to be quite factual. The 3 sections, there is part A, which is where it'll start at a fairly high level, just going through the basic rules and process. It's not exhaustive. This is a training. It's not telling you everything that you can read in the handbook. Okay, so part A is the scrutineer process and some rules, and then it goes to part B is then the voting counting process in brief, and then part C is practical FAQ for scrutineers, and those FAQs were put together from experienced scrutineers. In fact, a lot of these notes came from experienced scrutineers, and when I say, they've done state and federal elections several times, and lots of analysis and that, and so mixing that with the rules, this is what I've come up with. Okay, so now I am actually doing a second training. It'll be a shorter one, and that will be a follow-up on rules on vote counting. So that's maybe a little bit drier, but I'll be able to show you some pictures, and it helps to get around the handbook easily. But this is the really important, the first place to start, and you may not want to go there. You might just want to look at the handbook. So just briefly, to see, this video will be posted on my YouTube channel, which is Liz Blake Political Education, and so that's where you'll find it there. And also Turning Point Australia have asked me to do this, and they'll be distributing this as what, very much. They've got a very good readership, and so share, and this is very, very quick, because of course the election is coming up very, very quickly. Okay, so part A, let's start at the beginning. Scrutineers, who are they? They're volunteers who help ensure that the voting process is fair and transparent. Their role, or your role, is to observe and monitor the vote counting process, the sorting and counting process, to make sure that all the votes are sorted and counted accurately, and that no fraudulent or illegal or accidental activities occur. This year in New South Wales, it's very, very good that the freedom-friendly and values-based parties are working together. It's really cool. Objectively, this means a greater possibility and potential for representation in Parliament, which is a vital outcome for New South Wales and Australia. But because of the big party bias in our counting systems, that's the vote counting systems, the voting strategy, candidate support, and a strong scrutineer pool are paramount. We really need to give as much support as possible to those parties that we really need to, the parties we want to get in, and independents. Major parties who also have scrutineers on hand, will be using every stratagem to challenge smaller party votes. Scrutineers are advised to familiarise yourself with the preference counting processes for both houses. So I'll touch on it a bit today just to introduce you, and it's all in thoroughly through the handbook. Okay, Scrutineer policy. There is a document I've drawn on. You need to see this as well. This link here is, you can pause, of course, and just look at that, take that link. That is the Scrutineer policy, the official document. But where you get the most practical is this one here. So just look at that link there. It's just, I could have made that shorter, couldn't I, really? I could have actually. So that's that whole link there. That it's just one thing. It's a PDF, okay, and it covers. It's big because it's for the candidates, everybody involved basically in the process. So advised very strongly. Well, you need to read that your relevant parts and understand it. That's a requirement to be a scrutineer. Okay. So, but you go through the relevant sections to yourself. Okay, now insights. Let's get into some insights from experienced scrutineers. Okay, so processes. As part of that, there's processes and rules. There are several important rules that scrutineers must follow. Scrutineers must focus on ensuring that the voting process is fair and transparent. Scrutineers must not interfere with the voting process in any way. They're not allowed to speak to voters or use your phone to record, or any other recording device to record anything, or touch the ballots. You're not allowed to touch them or interfere with the vote counting process. That's interfere. Okay, we'll get into that a bit more. Party scrutineers are not allowed to influence the returning officer. That's the person you would be relating to there in the process, with comments. So you're not allowed to influence the returning officer with comments about parties and their policy platforms. So that's not allowed from anyone. It is an offence according to electoral rules. They're not allowed to influence electoral returning officers. That's the name, is a returning officer. So the officials on site anyway. So the next point is scrutineers must keep all information that they observe confidential. They're not allowed to discuss the vote counting process with anyone outside of the official process. Follow all instructions from the election officials and obey any orders given by them. Okay, so there's a few rules there. This is not comprehensive, but these are some good foundational ones. And you're not allowed to wear any political party T-shirts, accessories, or any other political marketing material in that role as a scrutineer. Okay, you're supposed to be an objective for fair transparency. Now, so some vote counting rules for scrutineers. Now, there's the sorting and the counting. Okay, they have to sort and then they count. So the vote counting process can be complex, and of course, as I said, the sorting comes first. But the counting process can be complex, but there's some basic rules that scrutineers should be aware of. And if you're really ardent, you'll dig deeper, but it's very, very important to get the most important things right and clear to yourself. Okay. At the start of election day, if at all possible, scrutineers check that the ballot boxes are actually empty before voting starts and that nothing unusual happens during the time that polls are open. So if you can whip into there and check, at that starting point, you can do that. After polls close, but this is the must, after polls close at 6 p.m. sharp, the doors are closed and locked and the ballot boxes are opened under the eye of the local returning officer in charge of the booth. The Legislative Assembly, which is that lower house, and Legislative Council, which is the upper house, the big ballots, the big papers, they're emptied from boxes onto separate tables. The ballots are unfolded, flattened and sorted into piles, duly labelled and separated into piles. Through this, the scrutineer stands behind. Okay, so just imagine yourself in this process. They're tipping out in an orderly and going through that process of arranging ballot papers on the table, on your table, the table you're at, and just imagine yourself there, that you are standing behind where am I up to here? I'm following notes, obviously. Yeah, behind the poll official. And it's best to stand with your hands behind your back to avoid touching anything. You don't want to get into trouble and get thrown out, okay? That would be really bad. Okay, so because you're not allowed to touch anything. Then now votes are sorted into piles. The first preference piles for each party or candidate, or an informal pile. So it's a gradual process. It's a very systematic process. So there's first preference piles for each party or candidate, or an informal pile for each counting table. Each ballot must be examined carefully to determine the voter's intent. Okay, if there's people with all sorts of writing styles and messy writing. Not everyone is very illiterate, and some, it's not always easy. Everything isn't black and white. Let's say that. So. But what's really important is that each ballot is examined carefully to determine the voter's intent. If a ballot is unclear or has marks in multiple boxes, the scrutineers need to be vigilant as the election officials determine the voter's intent. The scrutineer's main job is to try and watch every vote and to ensure that every vote goes on the correct party's pile or the informal pile. So that's the real job, okay? No mixing. Just watch for no mixing, whether by accident or design. If you as a scrutineer sees an anomaly of any sort, for instance, a vote placed in a wrong pile, you should say, I challenge that vote allocation, or similar words. As a scrutineer, it's not a chatty place. You just say things directly and clearly. As a scrutineer for your party, you also need to watch the votes being placed on your opponent's piles to try and make sure that none of your votes and no informal votes go on another party's piles. Other parties also return the scrutiny that you're giving. Don't worry about that, okay? And they may try and reduce your pile your party's pile by various means. Okay. Any votes which raise a query as to validity, for instance, a vote with numerous crossings out, should be challenged and taken to the returning officer. Do not allow votes which may be valid to be placed carelessly into the informal pile. When the time comes for counting, so that's sorting, when it comes for counting, the scrutineer should keep watch on the count for accuracy. The poll officer will usually make sub-piles, similar again, but they're getting ready to count now, sub-piles of a certain number each. And I know in the federal election it was 10, but somewhere else it was 50. So they will tell you what is the sub-piles, and they'll place them perpendicular to each other in like banknotes, piles of whatever the number is, that and then that and then that and then that, and place them perpendicular to each other in the respective pile for that candidate. Okay, so there'll be, if it's 10 or 50, it'll be there and then that way and then that way, then that way, then that way, then that way for that particular candidate. And then there'll be all the different piles. Okay, where are we? Make sure that each sub-pile indeed has that specific number of votes, whether it's 50 or 10, whatever is the set amount. If you're not sure, if there was the right number in there, you can ask the poll officer to recount. The scrutineer that's your job. The scrutineer, you should take detailed notes. Okay. Now, the election officials must count the number of ballots to ensure that they match the number of votes cast. So the total amount of ballots has to be counted and compared to the number that was supposed to have been the ones that were cast. Scrutineers you are needed to stay to sign off on sealing the vote packages at the end, and or near the end of the night, and to scrutineer the upper house count. That's really important. So this really is an important job. Okay, the election officials must announce the results of each vote count because there's a series of counts, to the scrutineers. There's a couple of counts done on the night. Okay. But the election officials must announce those results for each count to the scrutineers and any observers present. That's the transparent thing, okay? If there are any discrepancies or issues with the vote counting process, challenge the counters. I challenge that. So it's not a discussion, it's just, oh, I challenge that. So, and just do it immediately and just firmly, so that election officials deal with it. Sorters and counters have no legitimate need for pens or pencils through the sorting process. Blank votes can be easily doctored, especially because there are blank votes. They can be easily doctored, especially if counters hold pens or pencils in their hand while counting, or if the batches of votes for a given party contain blank votes by mistake. So if there was a pile of votes for a particular party in that counting process, and there were blank notes in there by accident, they could easily be marked and then declared formal. So we do need the scrutineers. Okay, now so here's some experienced scrutineer tips and notes. So we're now going from the processes and rules to tips and notes. And I wanted to just show you interview. Oh, yes. I'll touch on this later here, but if that's the channel there, that's the link I should say there, to an interview. If you'd like to watch an interviewer, a scrutineer, an experienced scrutineer talk about that. The context is the federal election last year, but it's very similar scrutineering. There are differences, but it's very similar scrutineering for federal or state or the different states. It's mostly the same, very, very similar. So if you want to see somebody talking, sharing about it, that's a great link to go to. It's in my channel under the federal election playlist. Okay, so these experienced scrutineers. Some of the tips and notes. Okay, scrutineers should toughen yourself. Prepare yourself to stand true to your role and responsibilities, and prepare yourself that you are going to be, you're possibly going to be tried to be intimidated. You could, we don't know, but just prepare yourself to stand true to your role, because that's your role, and not be intimidated by party heavies. It's a time where strong personalities with very driven political aspirations and political goals can get intimidating. Okay, major party scrutineers would love you to get distracted or to feel intimidated. They would love that, okay? Ensure that no ballots are interfered with at any stage before being sealed up for the final scanning and counting. So there's no interference, okay, of the notes. You've got to watch that. Take detailed notes of any issues or concerns that arise through the vote counting process. This will help you remember important details if you need to raise concerns with the election officials. So, don't trust your memory, take detailed notes, but you're not allowed to unnecessarily delay the process. Remember, in Australians, just a point here, Australians in all states have learned a two-party mindset. There's an expectation that it's between two parties or two coalitions. And this will be reflected in the attitudes and the ways votes are tallied and counted and that. So just particularly for the legislative council, but just be aware of that. That's all. There is a bias there. Be respectful and professional at all times, even if you disagree with the election officials or other scrutineers. But so don't be surprised if there is disagreement. That's what you're there for. That's what all the scrutineers are there for. But be proactive in immediately interrupting any discrepancy you see. You could say, what is that pile of ballot papers? Or when will the informal ballot papers be counted? If this request is denied, record the incident directly to both the candidate who signed your scrutineer appointment form, like you record it and report that later, and the New South Wales Electoral Commission for possible investigation. So if you have any questions or concerns about the vote counting process, don't hesitate to ask the election officials for clarification, but no talking to other people again. Now, I am repeating a couple of things in different ways through this training because it's needed, and so hopefully you'll get some familiarity through this. The vote counting process, here's a couple of practical tips. It can be long and tiring, and you're switched on the whole time, okay? So make sure that you take breaks when you need to, and perhaps at strategic times, because remember, while you're away, there's nobody scrutineering. But take breaks when you need to, and stay focused. That's the biggest challenge, is to stay focused on the task at hand. There should be at least one scrutineer for your party at every table. Okay, at least at every table. If your party or others with similar policies don't have enough scrutineers, you can cooperate to cover each other, for instance, for bathroom breaks and that. But work together as support each other as much as possible. Do take a clipboard, paper and pen for making observations and notes, because you're not allowed to touch anything. The day before, practical again, hydrate well and sleep well. I wouldn't be hopping into all the sugars the day before or that day, because when we do sugars, like if we're really, really tired and we want a hit of something, it our blood sugar goes up like that, and then our brain gets furry and furry brain, and so just think healthy snacks and things that you're used to, and comfortable shoes. You're going to be standing a lot, so comfortable shoes, probably your most comfortable shoes. Now, officials also get tired and make mistakes due to tiredness, as electoral employees have been working at polling locations all day from early morning and into the night with counting and supervision. Okay, so there's some tips, and that from some very experienced scrutineers. Now, just a little bit, they also wanted to point out was beyond polling day. While the procedure on polling night is one thing, scrutineering remains important over the subsequent days. These scrutineers are the quiet heroes. They're not the ones out there getting the flags and that, flying their own flags and that, but they're the quiet heroes of the election process, and they are important. You are important over the subsequent days, if at all possible, because potential for irregularities exist, and the same strictures and procedures, so the same rules and procedures apply when you're scrutineering beyond polling day. Now, here's 3 examples of why your scrutineering role is important. It basically comes out of one story, and I want to thank an election researcher for this. Taken from her 10 tips of scrutineering for the federal election. Here's the importance of inspecting piles of ballot papers and challenging counters, where counters being people who count. So the importance of inspecting piles of ballot papers and challenging counters where appropriate. So an example was a scrutineer in the recent, sort of not that long ago, South Australian election, witnessed a pile of Liberal candidate ballot papers being placed in a separate pile, okay, and then a Labor candidate ballot papers placed on top of the Liberal pile, now appearing like a pile of Labor votes. The same scrutineer also witnessed counters, and they are electoral employees, using pencils and rightfully challenged them. Then the scrutineer reported this incident to the officer in charge, who acted swiftly to remove all pencils from counters. Very cool. And then another one is over 10 years ago at a political party members event, a past electoral employee openly confessed to using a lead pencil under her long fingernail to flick through ballot papers and to alter numbers that had been written in pencil and so render those ballot papers informal. Hence the recommendation for when you are voting to use a pen, not a pencil. Okay, so now here's a strategic voting for your choice of candidate. For, obviously we all have candidates who are our top choice, or candidates or parties, independents or parties, but candidates who are our top choice. Just seeing if I need to show anything here. No, I don't think so. No. Okay, so oh yes, that's right. On here, in this link that I showed you first, in there, now that's the channel, Liz Blake Political Education, under the playlist of New South Wales election. So you just go along the menu at the top of the YouTube, when you open up YouTube and go to my channel, and then it'll have things like home videos, playlist, that sort of thing. Go to the playlist that's New South Wales election. It's only a very small playlist, and because I'm only doing a little bit. And when you go to that, you can see I have done there was a video there, 30-minute video on how to vote, how to really vote strongly and how to vote strategically. So that's really cool. I really recommend you look at that. Okay, I will remove that now. Okay, so I'm only giving a very brief overview now, and this is in context of Scrutineers, okay? An overview of voting. So in the Legislative Assembly, the lower house, okay, and that's the one who wins, that is who actually wins government, okay, but that allows for optional preferential voting. So here's the rules. This is not the strategy, this is the rules. The small ballot is simply, it's the small ballot. Actually, I can just show you here. That's what it would look like, okay? It'll be something similar to that, just it's the small one like that, okay? I just find it easy to remember things by visual cues. Okay, so on that, the rule is that you have to vote one for at least one candidate. Now, the danger here, okay, the danger here is completely wasting formal votes by exhausting them. Okay, this is a really important thing, okay, when voters don't mark enough candidates. So while the rule requires that you mark at least one in somewhere here, this is a sample, of course, but you put the number one in at least one in, put the number one in one box so at least a number one is what I'm trying to say. But if you don't number all of them, like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever, however many are there, if you don't do that, your vote at some stage will exhaust or can exhaust. And that means it's not useful to anyone anymore in the preference counting. That's really bad. Now, we haven't been taught this. This is why I'm emphasising it. I had never heard of this before I started learning about the federal election process. I'd never heard it. And I've been around for several decades. Now, some of you might think I was terribly uninformed, but that's the average Australian. So there you go. And that's why I think this education is terribly important, because we've got to get this culture of this is how Australia operates. Now, actually, I will show you this example. Okay, in the 2019 New South Wales election shows us that this is not real. Remember, this is what you're looking at is a sample. But in the 2019 election in New South Wales, we saw that about half of voters only mark the first one or two candidates and leave all the rest square. So there might have been a 1 and a 2 or something like that. So about over half only mark 1 or 2. Now, this is really an issue, and this is how it can come out. Okay, but the issue being leaving other boxes blank. You should fill out all the boxes, okay? So, for example, in that year in Ballina, which was won by the Greens with a margin of about 5%, there was over 11% of formal votes exhausted. That means formal votes, that means these are formal, valid, good votes, that should have worked, done something. But because so many people hadn't, 11% of the voters hadn't filled out all the boxes, that vote exhausted. It stopped being, it couldn't be used any further than those the first two names. And so it got exhausted. And that's incredible, because when you see that, which meant that they had no say, all those formal votes had 11% had no say in deciding between the Greens, who were first, and the Nationals, who were runner-up. And so, it's incredible. It could have been won in the opposite way. It could have been, not saying it would have been, but could have been won numerically, could have been won if people had filled out all those boxes. It's an important message, okay? Now, going to the Legislative Council. Okay, we'll go to here. I'll just show you a couple of examples. Okay, that's the big, these are samples, of course, but big one. You can see there's that big thick line. We call that above the line, and we call that section below the line. So all that's below the line, all that's above the line, for obvious reasons, the thick line. For that one, the system here allows proportional representation of a massive single electorate for the whole state, which is a lot of MLCs. In other words, that's why you get this in here, because of our system. We get lots and lots of numbers here. Okay, now this makes the ballot images huge, with many parties, with many candidates each. You can see that there, resulting in hundreds of candidates standing below the line, sometimes, or hundreds of candidates standing for election below the line, long lists of them. Here, optional preferential voting allows above the line or below the line, above or below the line. The Legislative Council is where you hear about quotas. Now, this is the second big take-home thought, okay, where you hear about quotas. And this is more complicated to explain, and I'm not going to. You can look it up if you want to, but it is important. I would suggest re-watching Topher Field's Marbles video demonstration. If you go to his YouTube channel, Topher Field's YouTube channel, and find his last Marbles video from the federal election. And I did have a link for that, but you can search for that. And that, while that was made for the federal Senate, it showed the quotas. It demonstrated how the quotas work. He demonstrated with the distributing marbles, and that was very, very good. And so you get the idea. This is really important. It's very different from the Legislative Council, very different. And that's good. It's supposed to be different. But it does make things a bit more complicated with our voting. Okay, so our strong recommendation, my team, who are quite incredible in their election analysis, history, track record, and incredible intelligence, and the tools they use, advanced AI tools they use as well, because the analysis would take probably weeks or months otherwise, maybe months or more, or never get done. But our strong recommendation is out for the best chance of getting your favourite candidate or party in. And this is a mathematical process, and it's a mathematical logic, and it's counterintuitive, but some of this is counterintuitive, but our strong recommendation is to number above the line, to number all of them above the line. So in other words, here, every single one numbered. Every single one above the line numbered, okay, every square. Okay, so number all above the line in your preference. Okay, now, so this ends, we're at 36 minutes now, and this ends the part A. So you can either stop here if you want to, or you can go on to part B, which is going through the vote counting process in brief. I'll now start part B to this training, and this is going a little bit deeper. And so this is going into the vote counting process in brief. It's not the whole comprehensive thing with all the details, but that's in the handbook. But this is in brief from the perspective, or for the perspective of scrutineers. So scrutineers should be aware of these stages of counting and understand how the ballot papers are sorted and counted to ensure the integrity of the election process. Experienced scrutineers or well-prepared scrutineers can pick up anomalies in valid and invalid votes during sorting and counting. So let's go to the Legislative Council, the Legislative Assembly. Okay, we're going to start with that. There's several stages of counting for the Legislative Assembly elections in New South Wales. That's the lower house, and that's the small ballot that we're looking at now. So first of all, there's the initial count. It's a manual count where ballot papers are examined for formality and sorted to the first preference for each candidate, or to the informals or queries pile. So basically the initial count is they're examining it for formality, like is it a formal vote, and also sorting for first preference for each candidate, or they are or the vote is going, or they're sorting the ballots to the informals or queries pile. So it's formality and first preference for each candidate, or to the informals or queries pile. A ballot paper is sorted as formal if it has a single one, or a single tick, or a single cross and no other preferences, or if it has two preferences and each preference is a number and there's only a single one. Okay, the initial count is an indicative count only. Then the second stage, it goes to what they call two candidate preferred, TCP count. So that's two candidate preferred. So if I say TCP, that's what it means. So two candidates are selected by the electoral commissioner in each electoral district before election day, and the ones who are most likely to be the two remaining candidates after the distribution of preferences for that district. Now, it is not the official result, but they're kind of putting an educated guesstimate. You know, the electoral commissioner is doing that. Like these are the two most likely remaining candidates at the end. This is what we think. So it gives them something to work with. So now this TCP count, two candidate preferred count, is done immediately after the initial count by distributing each of the non-TCP candidates' ballot papers, so the ones who weren't the two, by distributing all of them to the TCP candidate with the next highest preference on each ballot paper. Now, here's important. When a ballot paper doesn't contain a valid preference for either of those two top preferred candidates, when a ballot paper doesn't contain a valid preference for either of those two top preferred candidates, the ballot paper is considered exhausted for the purpose of this count, meaning it has no further say in the result. And then the third stage, okay, then we're going to, so the first stages would be on the night, okay, in the premises, the booth. So then we go to the check count. There's the check count, which is a combination of a manual process called batching and data entry. So check count is the checking, of course. Ballot papers are sorted into a single preference and multi-preference. So single preference is where there's a one tick or a one cross, or and so that, and multi-preference, so single and multi-preference. And the informal ballot papers are sorted into blanks and non-blanks. These results are entered into the New South Wales Electoral Commission computer count system. This is the official count used. This will be the official count used in distribution of preferences to determine the elected candidate. So that's setting up that check count is setting up for the distribution of preferences, which is conducted by the election manager for the electoral district after the check count, and it's done with the system, the computer system, in an automated way using all the preferences and single preference totals entered during the check count, and this determines the elected candidate or candidates. So that's the Legislative Assembly, the lower house. And then I'm going to show you the Legislative Council sample ballot. In fact, I've got a few images here to show you. The Legislative Council ballot papers undergo the following counts, and it's almost the same, but it's not. The stages, it has the 4 stages. First of all, the initial count. It's a manual count, and this is where you need to be there as a scrutineer. It's a manual count that's conducted in 2 stages, sort 1 and sort 2. Sort 1, I feel like I should be in Dr. Seuss. Sort 1, the priority of that is sorting the above-the-line first preferences into party piles. And the sort 2 priority is determining if further preferences are formal or informal and how far the preferences stay formal, because there could be a stage in the vote in a person's ballot where it's goes off the rails. Okay, I don't want to get into too much detail here. Okay, so sort 1, the ballot papers are examined for a little bit more detail. Sort 1, the ballot papers are examined for formality, sorted into 3 categories, and this is above the line, blanks and others. Above the line, blanks and others are including informals. Above the line are sorted into this above the line pile is sorted into piles according to first preference. Fortunately, you don't have to memorise all of this, but it's good to sort of visualise, read it through, and visualise it a bit. But where are we? So the above the line are sorted into the above the line bunch sorted into piles according to first preference, which so that would be the above the line for each group with a group for each group with a group voting square. The blanks are sorted into into one blanks pile, and all others not in the above categories are sorted into others pile. When I said a bunch before, I was speaking carelessly. Nothing is in a bunch. Everything will be very ordered. Sort 2 in this initial count. Above the line ballot papers are further examined to determine if the preferences are valid and formal. So you can see them going through the stages. It's like, okay, top priority is first preferences, and that first preference, and then it goes into the further preferences. So sort 2, the above the line is still ballot papers are further examined to determine if preferences are valid and formal. If a preference is not formal, the ballot paper is considered to have no further preferences and set aside. If a preference is formal, the ballot paper is sorted into piles for each group according to their second preference, and so on. Okay, so there's a little bit more detail here, and this is why I said not everyone would want to do this part B, or you don't want to do it right at the start. You might want a day in between. Okay, then after the initial count for the Legislative Council, there's the 2 candidate preferred count, and that's the TCP count, and that is conducted for each region. It uses the remaining formal ballot papers from the initial count that have the 2 highest totals of formal first preference votes. And it involves a transfer of preferences from non-remaining candidates to the 2 candidates remaining, and continues until one candidate has a majority of the remaining votes. It's not the official distribution of preferences. It only provides an indication of the likely election outcome. Okay, and then there is, of course, that has to be checked. So there's the check count, and that's the 3rd stage count, and that is a manual count that is conducted to confirm the results of both earlier counts, because that Legislative Council is, which is similar to the Senate, the Federal Senate. It's the whole state. It's kind of like the whole state is a massive electorate, kind of. and I don't want to get any more technical than that. Okay, so the check count is manual to confirm the results of both earlier counts, and again done in two stages, sort 1 and sort 2, with the same sorting process as the initial count. Then it goes to the last stage, is the distribution of preferences, and that is to determine the elected candidates, and that's conducted by the Electoral Commissioner by the computer system. Scrutineers, if you can be aware of these stages and understand how the ballot papers are sorted and counted. You might even want to practice at home with, just to visualise what it all means. If you're a learner like me, where I need to see things and feel things, you might do that. Get yourself a bunch of post-it notes and work it through and you will be more educated than most vast majority of Australians. So it would be a great exercise, not required, but it's a great exercise. So but do be aware, because of these stages and the sorting and counting, to maintain the integrity of the process. Okay, so that ends the part B. And so now we're going into part C, which is, I will take this off here. Okay, part C now, which is practical FAQ. Now we come to part C of the Scrutineer training, and here we've got practical FAQ. This is for all potential scrutineers, and if you want to have, as I said right at the beginning in part A, if you want to have a listen to somebody who's scrutineered and worked amongst the electoral system, for a long time, and been a scrutineer several times. Here is an interview here on my YouTube channel, Liz Blake Political Education. And so you can see I've shortened that link, and that's the interview you may like to watch. Okay, it was created for the federal election last year. It'll be mostly the same or similar. Okay, so some questions that I posed to a couple of very experienced scrutineers. So from a practical and human standpoint, what would be the most important aspects for effectiveness when scrutineering? Okay, and so this is what I got back. Diligence, concentration for long periods, accuracy, and integrity. So they're those things there. It's not about personality, it's if you can do those things. What does the candidate need most from the scrutineers? So the party that you want to get in, or the parties that you like, that you are favourable towards, but you will obviously be scrutineering for a candidate, because that's how they have to sign your form. Okay. What does the candidate need? What does the candidate need most from the scrutineers? And that is also diligence, concentration for long periods, accuracy, and integrity. So outside of not following the rules, how can a scrutineer do a poor job or a great job? And the response was, concentration is paramount. That's not easy, but with if you're a person of faith, prayerful application, it's certainly mindful application, it can be done. What points or stages in the day's process are more vulnerable to shady activities? Not that I will allege such. The response was that during the day there can be altercations outside the booth, which have been witnessed in the past, but after polling closes, the informal vote needs to be watched carefully, as valid votes can be put there whether by accident or design. Okay. Are there any behavioural cues among other? Remember that it's distraction, maybe fatigue, but distraction and intimidation that just prepare for. Okay, so are there any behavioural cues among other scrutineers to watch out for? And the response was, well, there can be intimidation from certain elements, in particular from the Labor Party scrutineers, but also major parties in general, because, of course, there has been a little bit of a shift in major parties. The Greens are a lot more powerful now. They would like you to feel intimidated or distracted. Okay, so if you know that, it's, sometimes tricks are played and little tactics played and that sort of thing. So just, you go in strong, that's all, but nice and firm, that's all. So from a practical perspective, if you see someone doing something that you suspect is untoward, what is important in the communication to arrest or to stop that, intervene that? Like, what's important, like the speed or the approach that you make. And the response is that see the returning officer for the booth and with a quiet word register a complaint. You can see it's proactive, it's quick, it's prompt, but it's not disruptive and unprofessional. Okay. What is your advice in self-management for holding your attention over a long day? And the response was short stops for recreation and a drink, but watching for others taking advantage. For people to scrutineer, when do they need to volunteer and be accepted by? And obviously you need to get in quickly now. But the reference is always go to the handbook, the Scrutineer Handbook, which I have here again, and that link that I didn't shorten it. It's a PDF, but if you just go to, you can see there's a clue in here. You can just look at parties, search on parties and groups, candidates and Scrutineer Handbook, New South Wales, and it will come up. Okay. So we have behind this, all this that I've been delivering has been, of course, a lot of hard work, and some people who do want to stay nameless, but they're just the most incredible people who have contributed so valuably to this. And of course, I've gone through the rules in great detail and amalgamated the whole thing, etc. But I hope you'll be a scrutineer. I hope this has helped equip you and it has helped encourage and inspire you and challenge you to become one of the quiet heroes of the election. And I just wish all the best for New South Wales, but it will take more than wishes. It will take diligence right to the last moment. Thank you for listening.